let's get into this shit. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see what we got here.
2020.
2020.
The Vice President and the People.
Woo!
Reporting, Chief Anchor George Stephanopoulos.
George Papadopoulos.
Welcome to our town hall with Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, welcome to you.
Good to be with you.
We're here with a group of Pennsylvania voters. You can see they're all appropriately socially distanced tonight. And they're a group of, some are voting for you. Some have said they're voting for President Trump. Some are still undecided. And we're going to try to take questions from as many of them as we can tonight. And we're going to start with Nicholas Fedden. He's from Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. That's close to here in Philadelphia. You're a Democrat.
I am a Democrat. Thank you, George. Mr. Vice President, every day my wife and I are in disbelief at the lack of coordinated federal action on COVID-19. We know that your administration would follow the science. My question for you is two parts. First, looking backwards to when this country first became aware of COVID-19, what would following the science have meant in terms of actual policy? And then, looking forward, what would your administration do in terms of...
It looks like he's going to cry. What the fuck is happening? We just started, and did he shit his pants already? Like, what is happening, Biden?
Following the science with real concrete policies that haven't been done by the current administration?
Well, first of all, going back, the fact is that the president was informed how dangerous this virus was.
And to the president's credit, he did shut down the country. He shut movement, I think, from Europe and China. And also keep in mind, the CDC said masks don't work in the beginning. And that was pretty much proven to be a lie to make sure that hospitals had the resources they needed to deal with the coronavirus. That's fine, but we have to understand that when a government institution lies to the American people, they're not all going to be like, oh, oops, you're forgiven. Come on.
And all the way back in the beginning of February, I argued that we should be keeping people in China. And we had set up in our administration a pandemic office within the White House. There were 44 people on the ground. I suggested we should be seeking, and I didn't hold public office. I was a former vice president. I suggested we, in fact, ask to have access to the source of the problem. And to the best of our knowledge, Trump never pushed that. All those 44 people came home, never got replaced. In addition to that, I pointed out that I
think he's talking about when Trump was being really easy on China, when China was like, oh, we're doing the best we can. And they were like full of shit. They were actually just trying to like lock people in with the coronavirus into like their towns. It was really messed up.
I thought in February, I did a piece for USA Today saying this is a serious problem. Trump denied it. He said it wasn't. We later learned that he knew full well how serious it was when he did an interview with Bob Woodward. And at the time, he said he didn't tell anybody because he was afraid Americans would panic.
It's a fair assessment, specifically because, we only had limited resources. And again, in order to get the protective equipment that we needed, we needed to seize factories and also make sure that they were regulated to the degree that we actually push these masks and other protective equipment out properly. You need to have proper accreditations, I guess you could say, proper protocols in order to push out this particular stuff. So it's fair that Trump said that.
Americans don't panic. He panicked. He didn't say a word to anybody. Then I wrote a piece.
Because at that point, it's like, what were you going to do? You're going to get people hysterical, and then like you couldn't change it because you needed time. Time was what we needed. We needed time to get to a point where we could handle the coronavirus well. It was never going to not hit anybody. It would have hit regardless of what we did. It was about stalling it while we got the proper equipment to handle it.
In March, about what I thought we should be doing to take hold of this, using there's an act that's passed a long time ago that allows the president to go into a business and say, stop making this and start making that.
And he did do that.
It took a long time for him to even institute that, to get ventilators and so on. And so the point was he missed enormous opportunities and kept saying things that weren't true. It's going to go away by Easter. Don't worry about it. It's going to
he did say that.
When the summer comes, it's all going to go away like a miracle. He's still saying those things.
Before you go to the future, can I follow up on looking backward just a little bit? You did have an op-ed in January where you warned to the seriousness of the pandemic, but there's no record of you calling for social distancing, limited social gatherings, use mandatory masks.
Not back then.
In January, February.
No, in
Right.
January, February. No, that's correct. There wasn't. That came at the end of March, and then I laid out a detailed plan relative to school openings in June and July. And I talked about, by that time, the science was becoming clearer and clearer of how this was spreading so rapidly. But the president kept it.
Based on what he just said, it seems like he said that the science came out in what, July more? His argument is that, like, yeah, as we got more science, and then you're criticizing him for what he did in February or March, what Trump did I don't know. It's like a little muddied, this whole thing.
Denying that. If you notice, from March on, I stopped doing big meetings. I started wearing masks. So it was at a time.
That's fair. That's like my biggest criticism of Trump is he doesn't push like basic things like wearing a mask and washing your hands and social distancing really well.
The science was saying, and his key people, Dr. Fauci, were saying, you should be taking these precautions. So what we should be doing now, there should be a national standard instead of leaving this up. Remember what the president said to the governors. Well, they're on their own. It's not my responsibility. The governors can do what they need to do.
That's true. It was a problem. He wasn't really aggressive enough about closing. He's like, I'll leave it up to the states themselves. And then when it came to reopening, though, Trump was all over, like, you have to open. So, like, if you're going to give it to people, if you're going to tell the states that they get to decide when to close, you don't get to tell them when they have to open.
Not my responsibility. It is a presidential responsibility to lead. And he didn't do that. He didn't talk about what needed to be done because he kept worrying, in my view, about the stock market. He worried if he talked about how bad this could be unless we took these precautionary actions, then, in fact, the market would go down. And his barometer of success in the economy is the market. Thirdly, what we didn't do is the president...
Well, that's everybody's, barometer of success for the economy is the market. We don't have a person-first economy.
Had an opportunity to open and allow schools and businesses to stay open if they got the kind of help they needed. So the Congress passed a couple $1 trillion worth of help, and what happened was most of that money, significant portion of that money, went to the very wealthiest corporations in the country, didn't get to the mom and pop stores. So you had 1 in 5, 1 in 6 minority businesses closing, many of them permanently, people being laid off.
The only thing I'll say to that is it's possible that those stores were already doing poorly before the coronavirus, and this was just like what pushed them over the edge.
And what happened was when the first tranche of the first round of money for unemployment, enhanced unemployment, went by, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. And to the best of my knowledge, and I mean this sincerely, I can't think, I've been around for a lot of presidents, and you know a lot of presidents in a crisis. I don't ever remember one never calling the House and Senate, Republicans, Democrats together.
Let's look forward a little bit. You said that you would lock down the economy only if the scientists said it was necessary.
That's a fair assessment because basically what he's saying is like Trump politicized the coronavirus, and he did. He did, while most people weren't.
Well, by the way, that wasn't the context here. They said, would I lock down the economy if science said so? I said I'd follow science. But I don't think there's a need to lock down.
But I want to press you on that point.
Sure.
You've been in the Oval Office for 8 years with President Obama. He would always say that only the hard-to-solve problems get to his desk. What is most likely to happen is the scientists will disagree. The scientists will disagree with the economists. So the question is, how are you going to decide this? Who are you going to listen to? And how can you contain the pandemic without crushing the economy?
Well, you can contain the pandemic by being rational and not crush the economy. For example, I laid out a plan how you can open businesses. You can open businesses and schools if, in fact, you provide them the guidance that
but now we're talking about the shutting down the first. This is all over the place, man.
they need, as well as the money to be able to do it.
Okay.
What's happening now is we know, for example, if you can open a business and you could have a sign on the door saying safe to come in, that's why people aren't going anyway even when they're open, and say because you have social distancing, you have plastic barriers when you go to the cashier, you have separators between the booths, you don't have large crowds, you reduce the number of people you can have in the restaurant, you make sure there's testing. That's a really critical piece that he didn't do, testing and tracing. And you make sure that people are equipped, going to schools. You know, the government initially said they were going to provide masks for every student and every teacher. Then they said, no. FEMA said, the president or whomever said, no, that's not a national emergency. Not a
It sounds like you said FEMA said it's not a national emergency. You can't really pin that on the president if FEMA won't do it, right?
National emergency. We need more teachers in our schools to be able to open smaller pods. We need ventilation systems changed. Well, there's a lot of things we know now. And
it honestly sounds like online schooling is a much better alternative right now with all the necessary requirements, honestly.
I laid them out in some detail. Now, again, when I say I laid them out, I'm not an office holder. I'm running for office. It's not like I'm still vice president or I was a United States senator pushing this. So I don't want to say I. But we did lay out exactly what needed to be done. And take a look. We make up 4% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's deaths. We're in a situation where...
Well, yeah, but again, there is an argument to be made about underreporting in other countries, especially like non-first world countries. But like honestly, we're like a center of like trade, man. We're with like the United States. Like, where do you think? I think we're the second largest hub. But New York is the biggest hub in the United States. Massive trading partners. We were gonna get hit really hard, just like China, who did start it, for context. So it's like, come on.
We have 210,000+ people dead. And what's he doing? Nothing. He's still not wearing masks and so on.
We're getting
true.
some more questions on COVID.
Sure.
The next one comes from Kelly Lee. She's from Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Republican. Voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Undecided now?
Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Hi, Mr. Biden. My question is about the coronavirus vaccine,
Yes.
or potential. Senator Harris stated that she absolutely would not take a vaccine from President Trump.
No, she didn't. That's not even true. Senator Harris said that unless the doctors confirmed that was safe, that she wouldn't take it. She didn't say she wouldn't take a Trump vaccine.
And of course, we all know it's not President Trump that would create this vaccine. It would be doctors and
Yeah, and she said if the doctors agreed that it was safe, she would take it. I'm confused with this question.
scientists that presumably we all trust. So my question for you is, if a vaccine were approved between now and the end of the year, would you take it?
I wouldn't.
And if you were to become president, would you mandate that everyone has to take it?
First and foremost, I wouldn't. Not by the end of this year. It's supposed to take years for a vaccine to come out. It's supposed to take years for a vaccine to come out. So, like, I wouldn't take it by the end of the year. Fuck that, man. I would never. Maybe by next summer, but I wouldn't take it by the end of this year. There's no way that it would be safe. Are you kidding me? I wouldn't take it.
Two things. Number one, President Trump talks about things that just aren't accurate about everything from vaccines. We're going to have one right away. It's going to happen and so on. The point is that if the body of scientists say that this is what is ready to be done and it's been tested, they've gone through the 3 phases, yes, I would take it. I'd encourage people to take it. But President Trump says things like...
And you really can't force people to take a vaccine. I mean, like, honestly, you get into like an iffy area. You know, you should, socially, we should be telling people they should, but you really shouldn't force people to take vaccines.
Like, you know, everything from this crazy stuff he's walking away from now, inject bleach in your arm, and that's
All right, we
gonna
get it. It
work.
was a joke. Take it easy. You know, you're so offended by the fact that Trump says that like you hate the military or whatever because of a bad joke you made, and now you're gonna rail Trump over a bad joke he made. I mean, can we just stop being petty?
I'm not
The both of them.
being facetious to him. He's actually said these things. And now Regeneron is the answer. That's going to cure everything. There's 500,000 doses. We got a couple, you know, we have more than a few million people. You know, and so, and most of the, if you notice, most of the companies who are developing these vaccines are working, they're making real progress. I meet with 4 leading scientists at least twice a week in the beginning, 4 times a week, giving us the detail on what kind of progress is being made. And right now, they do the right thing. When they run into a serious problem, they halt the test. They don't continue until they figure out what the problem was. They're not there yet. And the most scientists say it's not likely to have a vaccine that would be available until the beginning of next year, into the spring of next year. And in the meantime, what I worry about is the same thing with Regeneron, which is a useful a useful
Treatment?
tool. But
There you go. That's
what's
better.
happening is there is no plan to figure out how to distribute it. How many, we have 500,000, vials of it. Well, we don't have all the testing equipment. We don't have all the ability to get it to the people who need it. And what we should be doing now, and allegedly...
I mean, like Trump did say we could use the military, right? Fuck it. YOLO. Send him in there. Tell him shoot him with that drug. Bow, bow, bow. That's not a good idea.
It's happening, but I've not seen it yet, nor the docs that I've talked to seen it. There should be a plan when we have the vaccine. How do we distribute it?
And once we get it, if it's safe, if it's effective, will you mandate its use?
The
No.
answer is depending on how
You can't do
clear. There's vaccines, they say, have a very positive impact, and they're going to affect positively 85% of the American public. Or there's others say this vaccine is really the key. This is the golden key. It depends on the state of the nature of the vaccine, when it comes out, and how it's being distributed.
That's a dumb answer. Like, he's basically saying that he wouldn't mandate it because, like, personal choice. Like, we should be able to maintain the personal choice of whether you want to use the vaccine or not. And you should use it, and you're an asshole if you don't, but, like, you should still be able to maintain personal choice. This whole idea where, like, oh, well, it depends on its level of effectiveness. Shut up. Just stop lying. Just tell people that you want them to have individual choice on whether they should or shouldn't use it. Even if you say that everybody should, you shouldn't make it a law to require people to take this vaccine.
That would depend on, but I would think that we should be talking about, depending on the continuation of the spread of the virus, we should be thinking about making it
How
mandatory.
could you enforce that?
Well, you couldn't. That's the problem. Just like you can't enforce measles. You can't come to school unless you have a measles shot. You can't. But you can't say everyone has to do this.
Well, that's what you could do. You could say, like, you can't force them to take it, but you could tell them that if they don't take the coronavirus shot, they can't come back to school. They'll have to do it online. Okay, that's fair. I'm not an anti-vaxxer because I believe it should be personal choice. I take vaccines. I would take the vaccine maybe in next year. I take the flu shot and everything, but, like, you can't force people to take it.
But you would, just like you can't mandate a mask. But you can say, you can go to every governor and get them all in a room, all 50 of them as president, and say, ask people to wear the mask. Everybody knows.
And if they don't, fines?
And they don't, no, not fine. Then I go to every governor, I go to every mayor, I go to every councilman, I go to every local official, say, mandate the mask. Say, this is what you have to do when you're out. Make sure you encourage it being done. Look, George, you and I know, and I think you do too as well, the words of a president matter.
Absolutely.
No matter whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, they matter. And when a president doesn't wear a mask or makes fun of folks like me when I was wearing a mask for a long time,
It's true.
then, people say, well, it mustn't be that important. But when a
Got a
president
good point.
says, I think this is very important,
And it does come down to this idea of, like, governmental law versus social law. And it's like if the president was like, hey, masks are, like, necessary, you'd see more people following that kind of, like, social law ruling of wearing a mask. But he's not doing that.
for example, I walked in here with this mask, but I have one of the N95 masks underneath it. I left it in my dressing room, the room I was in before I got here. And so I think it matters what we say. And we're now learning that children are getting the virus, not with as serious consequences. But there's been no studies done yet on vaccines for children. So there's a long way to go, but we can make progress in the meantime and save lives. And the last point I'll make, if you listen to the head of the CDC, he stood up and he said, while we're waiting for a vaccine, and he held up a mask. You wear this mask, you'll save more lives between
I don't like her necklace. It just looks weird to me.
now and the end of the year than if we had a vaccine. It's estimated by every major study done from the University of Washington to Columbia that if in fact we wore masks, we could save between now and the end of the year 100,000 lives.
And avoid lockdowns?
And avoid lockdown, yes. You don't have to lock down if you're wearing the mask.
Let's get a question on the economy. Anthony Argyrakis.
Thank you.
I suppose that's a good point. Like, put the mask on. That's the thing. Do like the bare minimum preventative measures. Put a mask on. Wash your hands. Sneeze into your crux of your arm. Whatever. And then we don't necessarily have to do lockdowns.
Question.
From Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. It's a suburb of Pittsburgh, Republican.
I know
voted
it.
for President Trump.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You stated that anyone making less than $400,000 will not see one single penny of their taxes raised.
That's right.
But also state that you are going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. The Trump tax cuts reduces taxes for the majority of workers. I would argue not enough. What is your plan for either extending the tax cuts for the middle class or creating a new plan that further reduces those taxes?
I'm a little shocked by the question because his plan is to not raise them, right? We already said in the beginning. He's like, "Yeah, you said you're not going to raise taxes, but then you said you're going to raise taxes. What's your plan?" And Biden's just going to be like, "I'm not going to raise taxes," like you said. It's a silly. I don't know. It's an okay question. It's just like silly.
I carry this card with me. When I said the Trump tax cuts, about 1.3 trillion of the $2 trillion in his tax cuts went to the top 1/10 of 1%. That's what I'm talking about eliminating, not all the tax cuts that are out there.
There you go.
And by the way, if you just take a look, we reduced the corporate tax rate from 35%, and Democrats and Republicans who were in office thought it should come down to 28%. He reduced it to 21%. You have 91 out of the Fortune 500 companies not paying a single solitary penny. If you raise the corporate tax just back to 28%, which is a fair tax, you'd raise $1.3 trillion by that one act.
Well, that's over the course of 10 years, for sure. Still a lot, $130 billion a year. But I think the bigger issue, again, is less the taxes and more the tax avoidance and the loopholes. That needs to be changed more than anything else. Because if they're not paying any taxes, like you just said, it's not because of the tax bracket being low. It's because of avoidance.
If
Gotta
you made
close these tax loopholes, man.
sure the people making over 400 grand paid what they did in the Bush administration, 39.6%, you would raise another, it goes up to, let me get the exact number here, about another $92 billion.
Over
So
10
you could
years.
raise
Yeah.
a
That's a
lot
good
of
amount of money. But didn't he just say he wasn't going to raise that tax there? Maybe I'm wrong.
To be able to invest in things that can make your life
Specifically, he was going to not raise it back to that point, I believe he said.
easier. Make you change your standard of living by making sure you have affordable health care, by making sure you're in a situation where you're able to send your kid to school, and if you have a student debt, you can deal with it. Making sure that your home, you can pay your mortgage. You got 20 million people right now.
Mr. Vice President, let me press you on that, though.
Sure.
You're going to raise the corporate tax. You're going to raise taxes on the wealthy. Is it wise to do even that when the economy is as weak as it is right now? Another
No, it's not.
900,000 people.
It's really not. Like you, I just said it before when I was going through the Trump one. You should really wait till we hit next year, maybe even the end of next year, before raising taxes. Honestly,
That's a great question. Moody's did an analysis of my detailed analysis of my tax plan and my economic plan.
Okay.
They said, I will in 4 years, Moody's, Wall Street, said I will create 18.6 million new jobs, good paying jobs, number one. Number two, and I'll increase, the GDP will grow by $1 trillion more than it would under Trump, and 7 million more jobs than under Trump. And the reason is when you allow people to get back in the game and have a job, everything moves. Everything moves. Right now, you got the opposite. You had last year.
If that's true, that's
during
good.
This pandemic, you had the wealthiest billionaires in the world, in the nation. They made another $700 billion. $700 billion. He talks about a V-shaped recovery. It's a K-shaped recovery. If you're on the top, you're going to do very well. And the other thing and if you're in the bottom, or you're in the middle or the bottom, your income is coming down. You're not getting a raise. I don't know what you do. You may get a raise. Hope you're a billionaire. But all kidding aside, but it's about growing the economy. And George, the way out, the reason why I'm so optimistic about economic recovery, more than I've ever been, is we have these 4 crises happening all at once, and one helps the other. For example, we're going to invest a great deal of that money into infrastructure. and into a green infrastructure. We're going to put 500,000 charging stations on new highways we're building and old highways we're building. We're going to own the electric market. You know as well as I do from your days, in the old days, where the president spends about $600 billion a year on government contracts. Everything from making sure they have aircraft carriers to automobile fleets for in the United States. If you make,
Is that for the military?
And it's not violation of any international trade agreement, made in America. If you actually insist that, whatever that product is, made in America, including the material that goes into the product, it's estimated we're going to create somewhere between another 4 and 6 million jobs just by doing that.
Well, that's fair. They have to understand, though, that the offset to that is it's going to be more expensive, which is fine, but it's going to lower the actual buying and selling of those particular products because they're going to be more expensive. So got to keep that in mind as well.
But what's happening now? Under his trade policy, a lot of this is going overseas. You get a benefit from going overseas if you have much of it being made overseas. So if you send it overseas, you get a 10% tax increase on the product. If you make it in America and you bring it back, you get a 10% growth. If you bring back a company and you're going to open up an old facility.
I mean, to Trump's credit, that's why he reduced like a lot of the carbon taxes, was to make their steel more competitive. Again, I disagree with him doing it, but I don't know. That's why he did that, to make it cheaper to build things in America.
You get a 10% tax credit for all you invested. That actually works, George.
So there's not going to be any delay on the tax increases?
No, well, I got to get the votes. That's why, the one thing that I have this strange notion. We are a democracy.
Why are these questions so long? We drilled the shit out of Trump for every one of his questions, and we chained him off and we rushed him through it. This is the question number 2.
My Republican friends and some of my Democratic friends even occasionally say, well, if you can't get the votes by executive order, you're going to do something. Things you can't do by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're a democracy. We need consensus.
Got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I hope I answered your question.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a line for...
Woo!
One of them.
Shut the fuck up. What is all this?
But 4 years later, he's still...
What the fuck?
Empire Today's half price sale.
What is happening? Why is this a fucking problem trying to get through the thing?
But 4 years later, he's still taking shots at his former rival.
Occasionally say, well, if you can't get the votes by executive order, you're going to do something. Things you can't do by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're a democracy. We need consensus.
Conflict. So my question for you then is,
Cedric Humphreys,
Okay,
a
we're
student
back.
from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, progressive Democrat.
What the fuck was that?
Don't jump, Cedric. You look like you're way up there.
I'll be okay. Thank you, George. And good evening, former Vice President Biden.
It makes more sense to have an own personal microphone on these people so that they don't have to use the same mic.
Many people believe that the true swing demographic in this election will be black voters under the age of 30. Not because they'll be voting for Trump, but because they won't vote at all. I myself have had this exact same conflict. So my question for you then is, besides you ain't black, what do you have to say to young black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
You know what's so funny about the whole "you ain't black unless you vote for Biden" thing? It's like you have people in the black community who basically do say that, and it's like, yeah, that's true. But then when Biden says it, we realize how fucking dumb it is to be toxic and gatekeeping the black community. So,
Well, I say, first of all, as my buddy John Lewis said, it's a sacred opportunity and right to vote. You can make a difference. If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that. And the next question is, am I worthy of your vote? Can I earn your vote? And the answer is, there's two things
Probably
I
not.
think that I care, and I've demonstrated I care about my whole career. One is, in addition to dealing with a criminal justice system to make it fair, and make it more decent, we have to be able to put black Americans in a position to be able to gain wealth.
I don't think that he's really supported that his whole career. I remember him talking about advocating for putting away criminals even though we could understand they had a rough background because they needed to be off the street. Now, that makes sense, but there didn't seem to be any real plan to provide them opportunity per se. And now we get to this point right now, where as much as we may not like Trump, socially he may be terrible for race relations, but economically he has done things. Again, lowest black unemployment. He's gotten people out of jail for bullshit petty charges. I believe he extended financial opportunity, like bank-wise, to different areas like opportunity zones. And now the most recent thing is that he's talking about, basically told Ice Cube, hey, I'm going to work with you for this platinum plan to provide more opportunity to black people. And Biden's administration was like, we'll deal with that after the election. And it's like, listen, neither side really cares about black people. I've said it 100 times. They only really care when they can benefit. But if Trump's actually going to be willing to implement something now and work it in for the black vote, and Biden's not really going to talk about it if he gets elected, then why would you throw your weight behind Biden when Trump is actually substantiating his claim to help black people
generate wealth? And so you look at what that entails. It entails everything from early education. That's why I'm supporting making sure that we in Title I schools, as you know, schools with the least tax base.
I know they can't do anything till they're in power, but again, they said they're not even going to consider it until after the election. They could have said, yeah, let's work on that right now as a promise when we get in the election, but they didn't do that. They brushed it aside. And when you have how much longer should black Americans have to wait before they get rights or increased opportunity? It's always a promise, never delivered. So what makes you think they'd even deliver on the promise if they did promise, like if they even made that promise? I'm just saying. Every several years, we force another controversy, we push it into the media light that exemplifies another issue in the black community, and then we stop caring once election season is over. And it's because historically America doesn't care about black people unless it can give them some kind of a leverage and some kind of when it comes to voting for things. So let's keep that in mind.
To be able to support their schools, I increased the funding for them from $15 to $45 billion. That allows every teacher in that school to make up to $60,000. And the problem now is they're leaving the schools; they're not there. We're short about 1.5 million teachers, 1.25 million teachers. Number two, every 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old will go to school, not daycare, school. And what all the great universities, including the one you've gone to, or went to, in fact, talks about in the last 8 years, what's happened. What happens when you let them go to school, they make up rapidly whatever shortcoming they had in terms of their education prior to that. They have not heard as many words spoken, et cetera, et cetera. What happens is that the studies show that 58% will increase by 58% their chance of going all through 12 years of school and going through successfully. We'll also provide for the ability to bring in social workers and school psychologists. We have one school psychologist in America now for every 1,507 kids. It should be 1 to 500, not just in.
We wouldn't need so much mental health advocacy if people weren't as poor as they were due to the upper class having a ton of money and poor wealth distribution in America. So what we could do to provide opportunity and finances to people is a universal basic income, baby.
Schools that are poor, but in all schools.
Got 'em.
Because we learned that, for example, drug abuse doesn't cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse, the failure to get hold of people and deal with their anxiety.
That's why we got to give people a UBI.
In addition to that, I provide for $70 billion for HBCUs for them to be able to have the wherewithal to do what other universities can do because they don't have the kind of foundational support they need. And so that would allow them, for example, like we did in our administration.
We just established that Trump did push their budget for another 10 years. So
the president allowed me to go down, and we awarded a cybersecurity laboratory, a building ability to compete for a cybersecurity laboratory. The federal government spends billions of dollars a year on universities because they're the best kept secret or where most of the major inventions come out of. And so that school now will be able to produce young black women and men who are going to go into a field of the future that's burgeoning, cybersecurity. And that's what's going to help a great deal. In addition to that, if you're a young man about to graduate or you graduated from school and you want to own your first home, or well, it's awful hard to get the money, and depending on the background, what your economic background is, to get a down payment. So we're going to guarantee first-term home buyers a $15,000 down payment for first-term home buyers. In addition to that, what all the studies now show, and I've been arguing this for a long time, is young black entrepreneurs are just as successful as white entrepreneurs or anyone else given a shot. But you can't get the money. Where do you go to get the startup money? So what President Obama and I did, we had a program where we took $1.5 billion and we invested it in all the SBAs around the country, in the state SBAs, small business associations, and that generated $30 billion came off the sideline, because if you have a guarantee of $200,000 for your new startup enterprise, young entrepreneur, you're going to be able to attract, if it's government money as a guarantee, you'll be able to attract another $100,000. It generated $30 billion. Well, I'm changing that program, and I'll get this done without much trouble, I believe, in the Congress, from $1.5 billion to $30 billion to $30 billion. That'll take $300 billion.
He's having a little trouble getting through his words, and he's droning on a little bit, and that's fine. Like, all the positive things that the Obama administration did, that's great. But like, my big focal point would be like with this whole, what was it, the Platinum program, where like this is the now, and Biden's administration said like, we'll push it off until after we win the election. But then there's no guarantee they'll care enough to talk about it if they win the election. And that's a big problem, because to me it just seems like they're brushing off these issues, and like Trump, whether he cares about black people or not, at least he's saying he'll do it now. He's trying to fit it in. I'm just saying.
Off the sideline and grow.
Like, who would you go with? The guy that's like, we'll wait, or the guy that's like, I'll start working it now? It really shouldn't matter who's going to help you, especially since you know that historically neither party actually gives a shit about black people, right?
Because and
just got to get the help.
For example, if you, in fact, and I were the same age, and we split our differences, and we were the same age, and we went to the same builder to buy us each the same home, but my home was in a white neighborhood on one side of a highway, and yours is in a black neighborhood, same exact home. Your home will start off being valued 29% less than my home.
Yet cheaper to buy, baby.
Your insurance for that home will be higher. You'll be taxed more for it. We've got to end this. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place, a thing called redlining. We can change so much, that we can do so much to change the circumstances to give people a real opportunity.
Cedric, did you hear what you needed?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, do you hear what you needed to hear?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, there's a lot more if you want.
He doesn't seem too thrilled with that answer.
If you're going to hang around afterwards, I'll tell you more.
Okay.
Let's get it.
No, but I really mean it. It is the key.
It seems like he's not actually happy with anything that he just said.
Look, this is the way every other. How do most, like my dad, he lost his job up in Scranton, and
this guy doesn't give a fuck.
3 years to be able. He moved down to Delaware, to Claymont, Delaware, a little steel town, and sent us home to our grandpa to live with him. We finally got back. We lived in apartments, became 6 and 8 housing. Much later, it wasn't. It was just normal apartments, but it took him 5 years to be able to buy a home. Well, we bought a 3-bedroom home with 4 kids and a grandpa living with us, but it accumulated wealth. You built up wealth. That's how middle-class folks make it. They build up wealth. Then he was able to borrow a little against that to be able to help us get to school, those kinds of things. It's about accumulating wealth.
I think it's time for our next caller.
The vast majority of people are behind an 8 ball. And it's the same way what's going on now with all this money that's been voted. What's happened? You go to the bank if you're a black businessman, and the president fired the only inspector general to oversee all this help coming from the Congress. And what happens? You go in and they say, do you have an account here? No. Do you have a credit card with this? No. Have you borrowed from us before?
God.
No. We bail these suckers out. They're not liable for any of the money. But they still won't rent it. They still won't lend it to you. We got to change that. It's about accumulating wealth.
Want to get another question in here from Angelica
sorry.
Politaros? No, not at all. Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania, Republican who voted for President Trump last time.
Thank you. Thank you,
Jesus
George.
Christ.
Thank you, Vice President Biden. Nice to meet you. What's your view on the crime bill that you wrote in 1994, which showed prejudice against minorities? Where do you stand today on that?
Well, first of all, things have changed drastically. That crime bill, when it voted, the Black Caucus voted for it. Every black mayor supported it across the board. And it didn't. The crime bill itself did not have mandatory sentences except for two things. It had 3 strikes and you're out, which I voted against in the crime bill. But it had a lot of other things in it that turned out to be both bad and good. I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. That was part of it. The assault weapons ban and other things that were good. What I was against was giving states more money for prison systems that they could build, state prison systems. And you have 93 out of every 100 people in jail now is in a state prison, not in a federal prison, because they built more prisons. I also wrote into that bill a thing.
I mean, what does that necessarily matter unless he's talking about private prisons?
Drug courts. I don't believe anybody should be going to jail for drug use. They should be going into mandatory rehabilitation.
That's fair.
We should be building rehab centers to have these people housed.
That's fair, because like the reality is if you put like a drug addict in jail, they're not going to come off of drugs. There's no facility that actually does anything to help you in a prison. Like you can't expect a fucking correctional officer to be like, oh, let me help you get off drugs. No, of course not. So yeah.
We should wipe out, we should decriminalize marijuana, wipe out the record so you can actually say in honesty, have you ever been arrested for anything? You can say no, because we're going to pass a law saying there is no background that you have to reveal relative to the use of marijuana. And so there's a lot of things, but in addition to that, we got to change the system. I joined with a group of people in the House to provide for changing the system from punishment to rehabilitation. Along with a guy named Arlen Specter, who you may remember, I wrote the Second Chance Act.
In the meantime, an awful lot of people were jailed for minor drug crimes after the
Exactly right.
Was it a mistake to support it?
Yes, it was. But here's where the mistake came. The mistake came in terms of what the states did locally. What we did federally...
I mean, it just seems like he's trying to pass off what he did wrong in the bill. Like, just say, like, yeah, it was a mess up. There were some good aspects to it, but at the end of the day, it wasn't a good bill. And, like, we goofed. We nay-nayed ourselves.
He said it was, and you remember, George, it was all about the same time for the same crime. What I had done as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, took the 10 circuit courts of appeals, took some really brilliant lawyers working for me in judiciary. We did a study. And we determined what happens if, for the first, second, third offense, for any crime in the criminal justice system, at the federal level, if you're a black man, it's the first time you committed robbery. How long would you go to jail on average? If you're a white man, how long? Black man would go to jail on average 13 years. White man, 2 years. I go down the list of every single crime. So we set up a sentencing commission. We didn't set the time. Every single solitary maximum was reduced in there. But what happened was it became the same time for the same crime. So it said you have to serve between 1 and 3 years. It ended up becoming much lower. Black folks went to jail a lot less than they would have before, but it was a mistake.
Let me ask another follow-up on the crime bill. It also funded 100,000 police back in 1994. You've often said that more cops clearly mean less crime. Do you still believe that?
Yes, if in fact they're involved in community policing, not jump squads. For example, when we had community policing from the mid-90s on till Bush got elected, what happened? Violent crime actually went down precipitously. Remember the significant rise in violent crime that was occurring in the late 80s into the 90s. It went down, and fewer African Americans were arrested because you had the requirement. The cops didn't like it. They didn't like the community policing because you had to have 2 people in a vehicle. They had to get out of their cars. They had to introduce themselves to who owned the local liquor store, who owned the local grocery store, who was the woman on the corner. And what they would do, George, they they'd actually go and give people their phone numbers. A cop would give the phone number. So if Nellie Smith was on the second floor where drug deals took place and things happened below her, her apartment, she could call and say, it's Millie, and there's something going on here, and they'd never reveal it was her, because they know if she knew that, in fact, they'd never report the crime. She'd never report. So it actually started to come down. What happened? They eliminated the funding for community policing. Community policing doesn't mean more people coming in up-armored Humvees and swarming like that. When they did, it turned out that by the time we got to the late 90s, the crime had come down so much, and the mayors and everybody asked the question, where do you want me to spend the money? They say, well, only 1% thought violent crime was a problem. It was as high as 22%.
But right now we have a systemic problem. How do you get the kind of policing, prevent the kind of policing?
It's just so inconcise. And like, I mean, I understand what he's saying about community policing. It makes sense for police officers to be more involved in their community. But I mean, holy shit, man. Like, this is a drag. It's hard to dissect what he's like saying, what is and isn't true, and what's just kind of rambling.
To change the way in which they play. One of the things I'm going to do, George, is set up a national study group made up of cops, social workers, as well as made up of the black community and the brown community, to sit down in the White House and over the next year come up with significant reforms that need to take place within communities. You have to bring them together.
Check it out, dude. Universal basic income, baby.
One of the things I've observed is, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in Claymont. You either became a cop, a firefighter, or a priest. I wasn't qualified much to do any one of them. But here's the deal, all kidding aside. Most cops don't like it.
It's like that was his joke and it just didn't even land. And he's like, all kidding aside, I gotta make sure you know it's a joke.
Bad cops.
Correct.
They don't like it.
Correct.
And so what happens is they get intimidated into not reporting. So one of the things we do is there has to be transparency available. We have to be able to go in at the federal level, be able to go in and check out whether or not there's systematic problems within police departments. If in fact a cop needs to be tried, it's not the prosecutor in the community, in the district or there. You got to go outside the community to get another prosecutor to come in and handle the crime. There's a lot of things we've learned, and it takes time, but we can do this. You can ban chokeholds, but beyond that, you have to teach people how to de-escalate circumstances. De-escalate. So instead of anybody coming at you and the first thing you do is shoot to kill, you shoot them in the leg. There's ways you have to do more background checks in terms of whether or not the person coming in passes certain psychological tests. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry but it's really, I think, really, really important, is you have to be in a position where you are able to identify the things that have to change. And one of the things that has to change is so many cops get called into circumstances where somebody is mentally off, like what happened not long ago with that guy with the knife. That's why we have to provide within police departments psychologists and social workers to go out with the cops on those calls, some of those 911 calls, to de-escalate the circumstance, to deal with.
Sure, that makes sense.
With talking them down. But we can't, cops are kind of like.
I mean, like in Biden's defense, like it's just so inconcise. Like just make your point.
School teachers now. You know, a school teacher has
not
to
trying
know
to be an asshole.
How to handle hunger in a household, as well as how to teach you how to read. Well, cops don't have that breadth. And there's a lot of things we can do. We shouldn't be defunding cops. We should be mandating the things that we should be doing within police departments and make sure there's total transparency.
Got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
I don't know the answer to your question, but.
He's like internally struggling. He's like, I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry. Why are we even asking them if it answered the question?
Get ready.
We weren't doing that with Trump, with Biden. Trump, yeah.
Philadelphia.
Next topic, the questioner Nathan Osborne of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania,
Jesus.
Democrat.
Hi, I'm George, Mr. Vice President.
Hey, Nathan.
Our country's first Supreme Court gave its first rulings just 2 blocks from here, from 1791 to 1800, and it's become more polarized since then. Merrick Garland didn't get a hearing for all of 2016, and Amy Coney Barrett's being pushed through at the last minute, even though millions have already voted. So what do you think about ideas from people like Pete Buttigieg and others to put in place safeguards that will help ensure more long-term balance and stability?
Like what?
And what do you say to LGBTQ Americans and others who are very worried right now about erosions of their rights and our democracy as a whole?
What the fuck? I'm confused. Was his question about... I'm so confused. Was he asking about Supreme Court justice picks or nominations? And then he kind of spiraled into LGBT protections. I'm assuming because they were thinking that they'll be lost. I mean, there's an argument to be made. If the Supreme Court justice is, I don't know, Republican. Listen, I'm just going to say, I think that every elected president, right, every term should be able to pick their own Supreme Court justice. And then we should have like a limit of what, like it'll be like a 36-year limit on being in the Supreme Court. There you go. Boom. We did it. Now you won't have these issues where you'll get like 3 picks in your presidency. You'll get 1. Unless someone dies, then you get 2. But that should be fine. That's my pick.
Well, let me start the last point, work my way back. I think there's great reason to be concerned. I was on the road most of the time during these hearings, so I didn't hear many of them. I just got the recaps when I'd get in late at night. I've been going around the country, Florida, and anyway. And but my reading online, what the judge said was she didn't answer very many questions at all. And I don't even think she has laid out much of a judicial philosophy in terms of the basis upon which she thinks are there unenumerated rights in the Constitution and the rest. So, number one. So I think there's great reason to be concerned for the LGBT community, something I've fought very hard for a long time to make sure there's equality across the board. Number two, I think that...
I'm not sure if that's entirely true. I'm just not sure. I know that he fought against gay marriage and just fought for like a separate union. That was like the same, I guess. Separate but equal. I'm not sure how much he's fought for LGBT people, though.
Also, healthcare overall is very much in jeopardy as a consequence of the president's going to go directly after this election, directly to the Supreme Court within a month to try to get Obamacare wiped out after 10 million people have already lost their insurance from their employer and wants to take 20 million people out of the system as well, plus 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. So there's a lot at stake. I don't think it's appropriate. I think the Constitution implies. There's no provision in the Constitution. My problem is I made a mistake of teaching constitutional law for 21 years and the separation of powers. The Constitution implies that the way the people have a right to determine who's going to be on the court is how they vote for their senators and their presidents. We seek the advice and consent of the Senate and the
president's president for all 4 years, isn't he?
No, he is. But once the election begins, by implication, it is inconsistent with the constitutional principles, in my view. You get disagreement among scholars on this. But I believe it's inconsistent when millions of people already voted to put someone on the court. I think it should have been held until this election is over, see what the makeup of the Senate is going to be. If the president wins this election,
he should just say, like, listen, they did it to us, we're doing it to them. That's what he should say.
He should be able
to. How about that question of expanding
YOLO.
the court? Here's what you said exactly 1 year ago tonight at a Democratic debate. You said, I would not get into court packing. I would not pack the court. That's not what you're saying now. Is the nomination of Judge Barrett reason enough to rethink your position?
What is the nomination? What I wanted to do, George, if I had answered the question directly, then all the focus would be on what's Biden going to do if he wins, instead of on, is it appropriate what is going on now? And it should stay, this is the thing that the president loves to do, always take our eye off the ball. What's at stake? One of the things Pete has suggested is, and there's a number of constitutional scholars have suggested as well, that there are at least 4 or 5 options that are available to determine whether or not you can change the way in which the court lifetime appointment takes place, consistent, arguably, with the Constitution. I have not been a fan of court packing because I think it just generates what will happen. Whoever wins, it just keeps moving in a way that is inconsistent with what is going to be manageable.
So you're still not a fan?
Well, I'm not a fan. I then say it depends on how this turns out.
It sounds like he's saying, "Hey, listen, if if Barrett gets in, I got to pack the court for more Democrats." Oh my goodness.
Wins, but how it's handled. How it's handled. But there's a number of things that are going to be coming up, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about other alternatives as well.
What does that mean, how it's handled? How will that
be? There's actually real live debate on the floor. If people are really going to be able to have a time to go through this, I don't know anybody who's gone on the floor and that's been a controversial justice. And
I mean, at least George is giving him shit for what he's saying.
In terms of fundamentally altering the makeup of the court that's gone through in a day kind of thing. I mean, it depends on how much they rush this. And you think about it, George. Here you got a lot of people not being able to pay their mortgage, not being able to put food on the table, not being able to keep their business open, not being able to do anything to deal with what's going on in terms of the economy as a consequence of COVID, and they have no time to deal with that.
You can't keep pivoting back to COVID every time you lose a question, Biden.
But
he sees that he's back into a corner, so he's going all the way back to this whole COVID thing. We get it.
They have time to rush this through.
Well, right now it looks like they're going to have a vote around Halloween. So if they vote on it before the election, you are open to expanding the court?
I'm open to considering what happens from that point on.
The short answer is yes.
You said so many times during the campaign, all through the course of your career, it's important to level with
It is,
American
but George,
people.
if I say, no matter what answer I gave you, if I say it, that's the headline tomorrow. It won't be about what's going on now.
What are you talking about? You could just say, yeah, I'm not in favor of packing the court. That wouldn't be a headline. Now you're saying that you would only be in favor of packing the court if you lost, if they put this justice in. So it sounds more like you're a sore loser to me, no?
The improper way they're proceeding.
But don't voters have a right to know where you stand?
They do have a right to know where they stand, and they'll have a right to know where I stand before they vote.
So you'll come out with a clear position before Election Day?
Yes, depending on how they handle this.
What the fuck, man? His clear position is that he'll pack the courts if he loses if they don't hold the seat. He wants to pack the court to give Democrats more power. Ooh.
But look, what you should do is you got to make sure you vote, and vote for a senator who, in fact, reflects your general view on constitutional interpretation. And vote for a president who is more in line with you. And if you oppose the position that I would not have appointed her, but if you oppose my position, vote for Trump. Vote for a Republican who shares that view. But that's your opportunity to get involved in lifetime appointments that presidents come and go. Justices stay and stay and stay.
We have a question from a Republican, Andrew Lewis. I guess a disaffected Republican. You cast a write-in vote for John Kasich in 2016. You're going to vote against President Trump this year.
And John's writing in for me, by the way.
I know that.
Mr. Vice President, I'm sorry.
Mr. Vice President, my father, Drew Lewis, served as Secretary of Transportation under President Ronald Reagan in his first term.
Yeah.
Feels like there's I'm not trying to be like Guy, but there seems like there's a lot of white people here, and Trump had a more diverse cast, and a lot of women actually, which I think is interesting because it seems to kind of display the diversity. I mean, they're in different states, but I don't know.
I'll be darned.
And some of his closest allies and friends were Democrats, including House Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senator Ted Kennedy. Sadly, today we have highly partisan and dysfunctional governance, and I believe President Trump is primarily responsible for creating this toxic environment.
I think that Trump is a symptom of the toxic environment rather than the creation of the toxic environment. The reason a motherfucker like Trump got in is because of how toxic our political sphere is in general.
As president, how will you avoid the temptation to exact revenge and instead take the high road and attempt to restore bipartisanship, civility, and honor to our democracy?
As written by a fellow who won the Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote about the presidency. He said, you know, I doubt whether Biden is really Irish. He doesn't hold a grudge. In politics, grudges don't work. They make no sense. I really mean it. I have never, and the second point I'd make is, everybody talks about, yeah, Joe, when you were a senator and a chairman of foreign relations or chairman of judiciary, you got a lot of things done. You're able to cross the aisle, but the days are changed. When you're vice president, you got a lot done, but it can't happen anymore. It can. We got to change the nature of the way we deal with one another. And it starts off by the way your father was and Tip was and others. You don't question another man or woman's motive. You can question their judgment, but not their motive. We badly need an infrastructure bill. Well, what happens? I stand up and I say, you know, we need an infrastructure bill, Senator, but I tell you what, you're in the pocket of the cement industry. But let's see what we can do. You can't get anywhere. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. I learned that lesson a long time ago. I've never, even when it's obvious on its face what the motive is, stick to the subject and listen to the other guy.
Is he starting to, he's basically seems to be justifying being bought by companies, like politicians being bought by companies. Why?
Listen, what I will be doing as if I'm elected president, the first thing, and not a joke, and you can ask if they tell you your dad's old friends on the Republican side. I'm going to pick up the phone and call them and say, let's get together. We got to figure out how we're going to move forward here. Because there's so many things we really do agree on. And with Trump out of the way, the vindictiveness of a president going after Republicans who don't do exactly what he says gets taken away. There's going to be, I promise you, between 4 and 8 Republican senators are going to be willing to move on things where there's bipartisan consensus. Last example I'll give you. You know, after after Trump had been elected, named the next president, wasn't sworn in yet, I've been working on a thing called a bill relating to cancer cures, okay? And it was called the Cancer Moonshot. And I worked with a number of Democrats and Republicans, and we had a bill that was about $9 billion that made significant increases in research and development on cancer alternatives, NIH, and particularly specific cancer initiatives. And we only had, at the time, I think it was 111 or 114, whatever it was, votes in the House. I don't hold me the exact number. And we had fewer than 40 in the Senate. But after he was elected, I got those people together as vice president, and we sat down and we worked it out. And we ended up getting it passed 396 votes in the House and 94 votes in the Senate. And at the end of the day, because it had to do with the Biden Cancer Moonshot I've been working on, Mitch McConnell stood up, and I was presiding officer, and moved to name the bill after my deceased son, Bo, who had just died. So there are ways to bring this together.
But how about the question of political accountability? And is there some tension between that and bringing people together? You know, Robert Mueller laid out a lot of evidence of possible obstruction of justice by President Trump. What would a Biden Justice Department do with that evidence?
What the Biden Justice Department will do is let the Department of Justice be the Department of Justice. Let them make the judgments of who should be prosecuted. They are not my lawyers. They're not my personal lawyers.
So you're not going to rule it in or rule it out?
I'm not going to rule in or out. I'm going to hire really first-rate prosecutors and people who understand the law, like Democrat and Republican.
I think what somebody said before about how Biden's kind of just rambling until you just like stop caring and you just agree with them. Holy shit, man.
Administrations have had. And
these answers are so inconcise.
Turning this into a vehicle for as if it's your own law firm. You don't own that Justice Department.
What the fuck are we even talking about right now?
And you hope that what they're going to do is they're going to enforce the law as they see it. But can you remember any Republican president going out there or former Democratic president, go find that guy and prosecute him? You ever hear that? Or, by the way, I'm being sued because a woman's accused me of rape. Represent me. Represent me. Personally represent me in the state of New York on my not allowing my tax returns. What's that all about? What is that about?
Got to take another break. We'll be right back.
Shall be this.
Jesus Christ.
Now, take your
news on all.
look at the environment right now. We're going to get a question from Michelle Elisen from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a businesswoman, a social worker. You're a Republican who's voted for Democrats, but you're not sure what you're going to do this time around. Correct?
Correct. Greetings, former Vice President Biden.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Stiles. In a 2012 report of the University of Pittsburgh's Institute of Politics, fracking was discussed and its possible implications for the waterways from the Commonwealth to the Gulf. Fracking has made the population sick and killed wildlife in southwest Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and small business development centers have already begun to transition people away from fossil fuels. What industries that are not harmful to human health and the environment are you planning for Southwest Pennsylvania and the nation?
Well, first of all, I make it clear I do not propose banning fracking. I think you have to make sure that fracking is in fact not emitting methane or polluting the well or dealing with what can be small earthquakes and how they're drilling. So it has to be managed very, very well, number one. Number two, what we have to do is the future rests in renewable energy. The single fastest growing energy source in the world right now, because I'm going to say something that's going to sound self-serving, but I managed the Recovery Act, and I was able to invest billions of dollars into bringing down the cost per BTU of wind and solar. So now it's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than oil right now. And it has great, great promise. And it's also the fastest growing employer in the energy industry. And so there are a number of things that I would do immediately. Number one, there are well over 100,000 wells that are left uncapped in the region. We could hire 128,000 of these people who are working in the industry to cap these wells and get a good salary doing it now, number one. Number two, we should be moving toward finding the new technologies that are going to be able to deal with carbon capture. So ultimately, as a transition, we moved to a net zero emission of carbon, that we're still going to be able to use, if we find the right technology, some gas to be able to, if we can carbon capture. And I think we're going to be able to move in a direction where by the year 2035, we'll be able to have net zero emissions of carbon from the creation of energy creation. So we can move it by dealing with those. And every time we talk about global warming or the environment, the president thinks it's it's a joke, and I think it's jobs. Because
just for clarification, Biden never said he was going to ban fracking. I believe Kamala Harris mentioned she wanted to ban fracking. Just for context, you guys.
Is you'll be able to see now, as I started to say before, I, as president, are going to invest that $600 billion we spend in government contracts only on those things that, in fact, also are not only made in America, but building an infrastructure that's clean and new. And what we have to do is focus on the transmission of energy across the country from areas relating to solar and wind. The reason is that that has not been mastered yet. I met a lot of people in Silicon Valley. The battery technology is increasing significantly, so you're going to be able to have, for example, solar on your home and a battery this by this, as I'm showing you here, in your basement. So when the sun doesn't shine for 5 days, you still have enough energy. So we're making.
Yeah, I know that's like an issue with solar power. It's difficult to store. So that's good.
Significant progress. The other thing we're going to do is provide an awful lot of work. It's estimated to put close to 1 million people to work by weatherizing 4 million buildings and 2 million homes, because we'll save tons and tons of energy, or like billions of barrels of energy over time, and at the same time provide significant employment and a good union wages, prevailing wages.
Let me stick on fracking for a second. You said you don't want to ban fracking. As you know, It's an important issue here in Pennsylvania. Not everyone buys your denial. A member of the Boilermakers Local 154, Sean Stefani, was quoted in the New York Times today saying, "You can't have it both ways."
He's not going too hard on Biden, but he's taking some shots.
He says you can't meet your goal to end fossil fuels without ending fracking. What do you say to people like Sean who doubt your denial because they think you want to keep that promise?
Tell them the Boilermakers overwhelmingly endorsed me, okay? So the Boilermakers Union has endorsed me because I sat down with them and in great detail with their leadership exactly what I would do, number one. Number two, what I would do is I would stop giving tax breaks and subsidizing oil. We don't need to subsidize oil any longer, number one. We should...
That might, I mean, okay. That might be a little extreme. So not subsidizing oil anymore, that's a lot. Are you really going to do that? I feel like you've never said that before.
Stop that and save billions of dollars over time.
Well, yeah, I think we do like $500 to $600 billion worth of subsidies, oil subsidies a year. But Jesus, are you really going to do that? Maybe my number's off, but Jesus.
What I would also do with regard to, the difference between me and the new Green Deal, they say automatically by 2030, we're going to be carbon free. Not possible.
So are you for it or against it? You say you're not for it, but in your website it says you call it a crucial framework. The Green New Deal.
My deal is a crucial framework, but not the new Green Deal. The new Green Deal calls for elimination of all non-renewable energy by 2030. You can't get there. You're going to need to be able to transition, George, to be able to transition to get to the place where we invest in new technologies that allow us to do things that get us to a place where we get to net zero emission, including in agriculture. I've laid out a detailed plan. We should be taking the plan where we allow significant more land to be put in conservation, plant deep-rooted plants which absorb carbon from the air, and in fact pay farmers to do it. We can do things like pelletize all the chicken manure and all the horse manure and cow manure, and they can take out the methane and use it as fertilizer and make a lot of money doing it. For example, right now down in people, when I say that, they wonder what I'm talking about. The biggest carbon sink in the world is the Amazon. More carbon absorbed from the air, diminishing global warming in the Amazon than all the carbon emitted on a yearly basis from the United States of America, from all vehicles and all means. So we have to use our imaginations. We have to move in the direction as well, providing for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles will save billions of gallons of oil, create estimated, not me, Wall Street, 1 million automobile jobs. But we're lagging. We're not investing. We're not doing any of the research.
Got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what to say. This is so fucking rambly. It's going on so crazy. It's so inconcise. I mean, what Biden's saying isn't inherently wrong. It's just like, holy shit. It's just so rambly.
Welcome back to our town hall with former Vice President Joe Biden. The next question comes from Mark Hoffman, Center Valley, Pennsylvania, conservative who voted for Trump in 2016.
Welcome to Pennsylvania, Mr. Vice President.
Good to be back home. I'm from Pennsylvania.
Yes, I know. Scranton, right?
Yep.
So,
a lot of old white men asking questions, man.
Peace is breaking out all over the world. Our troops are coming home. Serbia is talking to Kosovo. And the Arabs and Israelis are talking peace, which I believe is a modern-day miracle, what's going on. Does President Trump's foreign policy deserve some credit?
A little, but not a whole lot. We find ourselves in a position where
I don't really know shit about foreign policy, so
we're isolated in the world, and we
it's not a lot.
Our allies are our goat alone. America first has made America alone. You have Iran closer to having enough nuclear material to build a bomb. North Korea has more bombs and missiles available to it. We find ourselves where our NATO allies are publicly saying they can't count on us. We're in a situation as well where in the Far East we find ourselves in the Western Pacific where we're isolated as well. You have Japan and South Korea at odds with one another. China is making moves. So I would say we find ourselves less secure than we've been. I do compliment the president on the deal with Israel recently, but If you take a look, we're not very well trusted around the world. When 17 major nations in the world were asked who they trust more, who's the better leader, and the president came in behind both the national survey, international survey, both behind Putin as well as Xi.
So it seems like the biggest issue here is that Trump has weakened the Americans' word. So it seems like Trump's done positive things, but then also done negative things. So I guess he's, I don't know, he's done some, if I'm listening to this correctly, Trump has done some incredible things when it comes to, ending disputes between particular nations and whatnot. But then he's also pissed off our allies. That's kind of what I'm hearing. And like you could say, I bring it up all the time, like we talk about the Paris Climate Accord, pulling out of that, kind of diminishing the word of like the president in general, not just Trump, but the president in general, the weight that word holds, as well as pulling out of the Iran deal, despite the fact that there was zero indication that they were, not holding up to that end of the deal. So.
And look what Putin's doing. You have Americans, bounties on American military's heads in Afghanistan. Major nations in the world were asked who they trust more, who's the better leader, and the president came behind both the national survey, international survey.
What the fuck is happening?
Less secure than we've been. I do compliment the president. NATO is on the risk of beginning to crack because they doubt our concern whether we're there. You see what's happening, everything from Belarus to Poland to Hungary, and the rise of totalitarian regimes in the world, and as well as this president embraces all the thugs in the world. I mean, he's best friends with the leader of North Korea, sending love letters. He doesn't take on Putin in any way, and I
find it interesting that I'm not necessarily disagreeing with what Biden's saying, but I found it interesting that he just referenced a survey where he's like, our allies trust Putin more. Even though, and you should be, or they're saying, like, hey, our allies trust Putin more, and then being like, yeah, Trump won't take on Putin. But it's like, if our allies are trusting Putin more, why don't you condemn them? Condemn our allies for not trusting Putin, or for trusting Putin more than Trump, right?
He is.
Sorry if I'm rambling a little. I'm just getting dementia from listening to Biden right now.
He's learned the art of the steal from the art of the deal by Xi in China. So I would respectfully.
Yeah, see, he just like railed against Trump for being trusted less than China and Russia, and now all of a sudden giving. Why wouldn't you condemn our allies for also advocating for them in that way?
No, there is no plan, no coherent plan for foreign policy. We've always ruled. We've been most effective as a world leader, in my humble opinion, not just by the exercise of our power, the most powerful nation in the world, but the power of our example. That's what's led the rest of the world to follow us on almost everything. He's pulled out of almost every international organization. He gets laughed at when he goes to the, literally, not figuratively, when he goes to the United Nations. I mean, it's not about the president per se, it's about the nation and the lack of respect that's shown to us.
I want to get one more question in this segment, and it comes from Mika Hack. She's from State College, Pennsylvania.
Wait, we didn't ask that guy if he felt like his question was answered, which I don't know that he probably would feel that way.
This is your first presidential election that you're voting.
Yes.
Hi, Mika. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm the proud mom of 2 girls, 8 and 10. My youngest daughter is transgender.
I don't know, man. An 8-year-old transgender person? That's rough for me.
The Trump administration has...
It's hard to conceive, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too regressive, conservative about it.
Attacked the rights of transgender people, banning them from military service, weakening non-discrimination protections, and even removing the word transgender from some government websites. How will you, as president, reverse this dangerous and discriminatory agenda and ensure that the lives and rights of LGBTQ people are protected under U.S. law?
I will flat out just change the law. Eliminate those executive orders, number one. You may recall, I'm the guy who said, I was raised by a man who, I remember I was being dropped off. My dad was a high.
So sick of the anecdotes. Just say like, hey, listen, I would protect LGBT people with the Civil Rights Act, and we're done with it. That's all you really need to do, because they're not actually protected by the Civil Rights Act yet. You know, just say that, and let's move on. You don't have to give us a fucking anecdote about how you may have had an interaction with somebody in the LGBT community when you were younger, and you probably hated LGBT people.
High school educated, well-read man who was a really decent guy, and I was being dropped off to get an application in the center of our city, Wilmington, Delaware, the corporate capital of the world at the time. And these two men, I'm getting out to get an application to be a lifeguard in the African-American community because there was a big swimming pool complex. And
are you saying that black people can't be their own lifeguards, Joe? Are you saying they can't swim?
And these two men, well-dressed, leaned up and hugged one another and kissed one another. I'm getting out of the car at the light.
And I threw up. I said, I hate gay people. I'm Joe Biden. Is that what move on.
My dad looked at me and said, Joey, it's simple. They love each other. The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, you know, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be.
It's a mess.
They make my life a lot easier.
I wish they asked Trump this question, though. I would love to see how he fucking handles that.
There should be.
You know, not for nothing. Why don't we ask Trump this question? We ask Trump all these fucking questions about coronavirus, but like we avoid real questions like why, like with LGBTQ people. Why are they not asking real questions with the Trump? They're asking about the coronavirus. We get it. What about LGBTQ protections? Why are we asking Biden this question and not Trump this question? I don't understand it.
Zero discrimination. And what's happening is too many transgender women of color are being murdered. They're being murdered. I mean, I think it's up to now 17. Don't hold me to that number, but it's higher now.
Yeah.
And that's just this year. And so I promise you, there is no reason to suggest that there should be any right denied your daughter or daughters, whichever.
Listen, just to be clear, black trans women are being killed by people in the black community. So let's just keep that in context here. You know, I understand that Trump socially is not good for transgender people, but like, you know.
If one or two.
That is an issue within the black community of not accepting trans people to a higher rate of like general white communities. And we're talking about more impoverished black communities, but still.
One, your daughter, that your other daughter has a right to be and do. None, zero. And by the way, my son Beau passed away, was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He was the guy who got the first transgender law passed in the state of Delaware, and because of a young man who became a woman.
Like, listen, he means well when he says like a trans woman. That's what a young man becoming a woman is. But like, it's rough listening to it.
Who worked for him in the Attorney General's office.
We've got one more segment coming up. Thank you.
And I'm proud of
back.
All right. One more segment and we're almost done with this.
Town Hall with former Vice President Joe Biden. The next question comes from Keenan Wilson, Narberth, Pennsylvania, Democrat.
Good evening.
Somebody asked me about like conservative areas. Like, yeah, sure. My point is that they're the high, like transgender black women are the ones that get targeted the most. All right, out of anything else in the LGBT community. So I'm specifically talking about like on average, by that logic, the black community is less accepting of LGBT people than the white community. What I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Intersectionality. Woo.
You say that you committed to entering this race after the events of Charlottesville in 2017. I assume that feeling that prompted you to run will not go away once the results are determined. So, hypothetically, if you lose, how will you use your platform to urge President Donald Trump and those rallying behind him towards the ideals of a more perfect union?
If he loses, yes, hold on.
How will you use... So, hypothetically, if you lose?
Okay.
Well, to be very honest with you, I think that's very hard. He is not, things have not lent themselves to him learning from what's happened, what's gone before. Instead of
Biden's
being
burnt.
chastened
He's got
by
nothing.
being one of the few presidents, the only president to be impeached and then have a member of his own party vote to expel him, it emboldened him. So, but what I will do, hopefully I'll go back to being a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and making the case that I've been made and at the Biden Institute at the University of Delaware, focusing on these same issues relating to what constitutes decency and honor in this country. It's the thing that got me involved in public life to begin with. As a kid, I moved from Scranton, where there were no African Americans, and moved down to Claymont, Delaware. And in Delaware, we have the 8th largest black population as a percent of population. It was an epiphany for me, seeing what was going on. And I got deeply involved. I'm no great shakes. I don't mean I wasn't John Lewis. I don't mean to imply that. But it's the thing that's motivated. My dad used to have an expression, for real. He said, everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity. Everybody. And it was real. Everybody is. And so whether I'm a defeated candidate for president back teaching or I'm elected president, it is a major element of everything that I'm about because it reflects who we are as a nation. And it's what makes us, this is every single solitary generation. The dial has moved closer and closer and more to inclusion. And we are a country that is a country of slaves who came here 400 years ago, indigenous people, and everyone else is an immigrant. And we're a diverse country. And unless we are able to treat people equally, we're just never going to meet our potential. But I think the American people want to see that happen. I think they're ready to see it happen. And I tell you one thing, if I'm elected president, you will not hear me race baiting, you'll not hear me dividing, you'll hear me trying to unify.
I mean, not for nothing, you did say you're not black if you don't vote for me. So that's kind of race baiting.
And unify bring people together. When I said I was running because I wanted to unify the country, people said, well, they were the old days. We better be able to do it again.
Agreed.
We better be able to do it again.
Mr. Vice President, if you lose, what will that say to you about where America is today?
Well, it could say that I'm a lousy candidate and I didn't do a good job.
Maybe.
But I think, I hope that it doesn't say that we are as racially, ethnically, and religiously at odds with one another as it appears the president wants us to be. Usually, you know, the president's, in my view, with all due respect,
I don't think that the president wants us to be at odds. I think that the president is socially inept and doesn't know how to speak to the whole country. But again, policy-wise, really not that bad for people of color. I'm just saying.
It's been divide and conquer. The way he does better if he splits us. There's division. And I think people,
if that were true, then why is he like the one like listening to demands from the black community with this whole platinum plan with like Ice Cube? Why is he actually trying? If his whole intention is to divide, why is he trying to get the black vote? Most Republicans are like, ah, screw it, we're not going to get the black vote. Let's stop caring. The very least, you give Trump credit for that.
people need hope. I think, look, George, I've never been more optimistic about the prospects for this country than I am today, and I really mean that. I think the people are ready. They understand what's at stake, and it's not about Democrat or Republican. If I get elected, you know, I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I'm going to be an American president. I'm going to take care of those who voted against me as well as those who voted for me, for real. That's what presidents do. We got to heal this nation because we have the greatest opportunity of any country in the world to own the 21st century, and we can't do it divided.
One more break. We'll be right back.
Ah, so many breaks. Better start paying me for these breaks. Let's see what we got here.
This defining moment in America.
Woo!
Former Vice President Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, as you know, President Trump had a town hall meeting tonight as well. During that town hall meeting, he was asked several times whether he took a COVID test the day of your last debate. You're supposed to have another debate a week from tonight.
Nice.
Just two quick questions. Do you expect that debate to happen? Will you demand that President Trump take a test that day and that it be negative before you debate?
Yeah, by the way, before I came up here, I took another test. I've been taking it every day, the deep test, you know, the one they go in both.
Is it so funny that we don't have enough tests, and then but you're like, yeah, I took 7 tests this week. It's like, well, what about everybody else, dog? Come on.
And because I wanted to be able, if I had not passed that test, I didn't want to come here and not, you know, expose anybody.
The deep throat test.
I just think it's just decency to be able to determine whether or not you are.
It's a tough question for
clear.
Biden.
And it's not, I'm less concerned about me, but then the people, the guys at the cameras, the people working in the Secret Service guys you drive up with, all those people. And so, yes, I believe he will do that. Look, I'm going to abide by what the commission rules call for. I was prepared to debate him remotely, which was supposed to happen, and he said he wouldn't do that, you know, a virtual debate. Our town hall.
They should have done them on VR chat. Virtual VR debate would have been awesome.
He didn't want to do that. I didn't set those rules. The commission set the rules. So whatever rules they set, I'm confident.
I want to see Donald Trump as Kermit the Frog. Fuck you, Biden. Is that good? Is that a good Kermit voice? That was like a bad one.
The Cleveland Clinic is the one overseeing it. I think they're going to not let happen what happened last time. They're going to demand that it's safe.
Hey, Miss Piggy. Is that what he would have said? Biden would have called Trump would have called Biden Miss Piggy.
But you expect to be there?
Oh, I expect to be there.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for your time tonight. Thank all the questioners here.
It's like 4
really
questioners.
terrific questions. I think you did a service to our democracy tonight. Thank you very
much. I
want to go back to
kill
my
myself
in New York.
after
George,
that.
thank you. So there you.
Oh, there you have it, guys. It's fucking droning. Let's put the alerts back on. Holy shit. That was
Thank you so much, guys, to all my Patreons, and a special shout out to my Papa XL Patreons. Without all you guys, I would just be some fat dude screaming into a microphone. So thank you so much, guys. Mwah. I love you all.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.